It is obvious to all that government has a spending problem and they have overtaxed and piled on fees to an unlivable extent. What is your plan?
So first, I want to say that this goes back to the structural deficit that is from the 90s. You know, the Enron by the sea, for people who aren't aware of that, and misusing money from that has been dedicated to certain causes has sort of snowballed. And some of the, I'll call it, policies moving forward did not actually remedy it, but made it harder. For example, Proposition B from, repealing illegally repealing the Pension Act, because then things weren't being funded. So in order to really look at the structural deficit and bring to voters, there are a few things. One, we have to, what is our return on investment? What are we spending money on? What do we need to do by our charter? And what's important to our community? And then we need to look at transparency, make sure the community knows, X amount of tax dollars that you pay, we only get a portion of that from the county, and we only get a portion from the state, because a lot of that is sort of mysterious. And then look at moving forward, what have we done to use the money wisely? So look at our return on investment on contracts that we have now, see what we can repair there, assess the non-union employees that have been removed from government union service, who have been given higher salaries and don't have for-cause protection, which puts them in a position not to operate necessarily in the best interest of the city, but more of policy and yes people, so to speak. And then next would be, we are a growing city. We are improving our libraries, where we want to improve our roads at a much rapid speed. We want to make sure that our street lights are working. We want to make sure that our public restrooms are available, and make sure that our trash gets picked up. And all of those lead to, what is that cost, and where are we as a big city in the scheme of things? While we just increased our TOT, which is a transit occupancy tax, it's still in the median, and we hadn't even been able to collect that of late. And then looking at the sales tax, we're the lowest in the county, and we are, some of the lowest in the big city. And, I feel for constituents, and I feel for San Diegans, myself included as a San Diegan, like, we want to know, how we've gotten to this place. And I think that is a much longer process. So knowing where our TOT is, knowing where our sales tax is, knowing that we as a city don't aggressively go after grants, whether that's for infrastructure, whether it's lobbying for line items for the state budget or the federal budget for certain infrastructure projects. We have the resources to do it, but we need to have the drive and the dedication to do that. Like, I myself have gotten millions of dollars for the city attorney's office to do work with the police department and other agencies. But if we did that coordinated as a city, we would be able to bring so much more home for our residents.
Okay. Will you support Proposition 13 taxpayer protections?
In terms of split roll taxpayer protections? What is the question?
That was the question that someone posed. So however you want to answer that.
Yes. I do think it's really important for, seniors and residents who've made an investment into their home to be able to gauge how much they're paying long-term. And if the property taxes on a primary residence become extraordinary, we will be pushing, seniors and working families out of their homes, which is not something that would be beneficial. I do think that we need to assess, the wealth and the corporate and the different types of property that are owned to ensure that those property taxes are being increased at an appropriate rate to give a return to the community members.
And this is something you kind of touched on, and Will you move public employees to a 401k and eliminate public pensions? If not, how would you address the city employee pension deficit?
The answer is no. If it's actually cheaper and better currently and long term to have the pension for workers. What happened previously is that it just wasn't funded. We need to fund the pension. The city of San Diego employees don't pay into Social Security. That is 6.2% that the city is automatically saving that they should obviously immediately be putting into pensions. Two, you have workers who are contributing to their pensions. And then there's only a very slim difference in between that is being added in order to have our pension. But city employees don't make the high numbers that private sectors do, right? So there is a balance to have good, strong workforce infrastructure and essentially a known costing, right? So the problem is 30 years ago and run by the sea. And then Prop B, those are what actually cause problems for the pension. It isn't the pension itself. So after people are out of work and people are seniors and they're, trying to stay in their community, we actually are saving community money and keeping people safe by having pensions and having that expectation for their future. So by dismantling that is to dismantle, the complete livability of one, San Diego, but two, the great work that our city workers do.
Would you support changing the way city residents have been asked to pay for trash pickup, such as changing it to a private trash company rather than a city-run business on our property taxes?
Well, first is that the voters voted for the tax, but I think that it has shown to be better maintained in-house. When you are doing the work in-house, you can control the resources and the employees and not get contract overruns, for example, and then you can work with your city residents to ensure that that is a fair price for trash pickup.
Where do you stand on sanctuary cities?
I support everyone in our communities and I support sanctuary cities. As a prosecutor, due process is very important and there needs to be communication from any agency that comes into the city of San Diego. I know that our police department here works very hard for its residents, and legal operations is not the same as sanctuary city. Like we are holding the line to make sure people in our community are being contacted legally.
If you had to drop out of the race and had to select another candidate to support, who would it be?
I'm unable to answer that question.
Okay. You're the only one who has an answer. But fair enough. What is your view on affordable housing that's not really affordable and ADUs everywhere without infrastructure planning?
Oh my goodness, yes, this is multiple questions in one. So affordable housing is essential, and creating it to remove people from living on the streets, to get people who are not making a wage that will ever allow them to live in a market rate apartment is critical. But I do think that those market rate adjustments on an annual basis, although there is a top, I think when you're having affordable housing, that those increases need to be slower first. And then talking about expanding the affordable housing opportunities that we have here is to work closely with the Housing Commission to see how we can become more independent of the federal vouchers that we rely on. We can't just be a bucket that accepts stuff. We need to be able to say we have assets and we want to make sure that we can provide more housing opportunities that are not so limiting and preventing people from growing and working and doing better for themselves, because it is a sort of a cold turkey kind of system, and we can't run a cold turkey kind of system. So that is sort of like the affordable housing section of it. specific affordable housing, not just for families and our seniors, but in working with the county very closely to have supportive service housing, because not all individuals who we know who are unhoused are going to be able to take care of themselves and can live independently. And we need to make sure that we have a safe housed environment where individuals can get real services. And it's not just, check in with their social worker, but they need something that's much more intensive. And we need to not shy away from that. Now, talking about ADUs, as the president of the town council, the Clairemont Town Council, we expressed our concern with the breadth of the original plan, and we did not support it. And now we are seeing the ramifications of what was known. And the concern that I had then and the concern that I have now is that we're still not feeling the transparency and the communication that we need with our residents. So understanding that the ADUs just as housing structures, they're small and they're not here to accommodate families that we want to keep in our neighborhood. Not all of them are going to be accessible for seniors. They're not necessarily affordable. You could probably find an apartment that's cheaper than that with more space. So many of them are at the end of cul-de-sacs, which is a fire hazard, an egress issue, getting emergency resources, getting trash trucks there, not having a coordinated system and plan. And that's just the logistics. So then we're talking about, the general infrastructure to get resources to those ADUs is just hodgepodge, right? It's very haphazard and unfortunate. But I will say with the Clairemont plan that was in the works for over 10 years, there is something to be said about building intentionally, because we have mixed use areas where we can still preserve parking and we can have good retail, we can have good community space, we can have homes up above that can actually accommodate families and seniors where they can actually walk to a bus and not through a canyon that has no sidewalk and no lights to get there. So we can't just do this quick fix that enriches only developers and expect that to be the silver bullet, because it is not.
Mm-hmm. What will you do to support transparent community input with real influence and not just symbolic hearings?
Oh, yes. It goes back to having a real connection. Well, first of all, like as a longtime prosecutor and public servant, like I am here as a receptacle for the community to bear the burden, because not everyone can be out at a city council meeting, or not everyone is going to feel strong when they're sitting in the witness stand, right? But you are the one who has the responsibility and the duty to shed light on what is important to people. So by not just going and having town halls so the community could come, but actually going to the association meetings and letting people say what they need to say to me. I have really thick skin and people want to be heard, from, the young to the seniors and everyone in between, because so often that we have common themes that concern us, and turning your back on the community is turning your back on the job. Like as an elected official and as someone who does evidence-based practices, I have the strength to stand up there and maybe do an unpopular thing, but if you're doing it because the people want it, is it really unpopular? And I think that we need to just sort of really assess who we're serving. And I'm here to serve, the working families of D2.
Will you scale back or cancel Pure Water Phase 2?
Well, I don't think that is a question for me. I think that is a train that is moving forward. So
campaigns require money and large donors want some sort of quid pro quo. How will you handle this? It's probably the issue with the biggest impact on how the city is currently run, which includes developers, unions, and special interests.
Yeah, I think the best part about me is that people know what they're getting. I give people sort of the unvarnished opinion. And yes, as city candidates, we can only take money from individuals, which is fine. But at the end of the day, I'm not here for special interests. We are here for the masses of working people. And to be able to do that is to say, well, I'm like using the ADU as an example. Did everybody benefit from these ADUs? No, there was like one or two developers who preyed upon neighborhoods and made it really challenging for so many across the city. That is not doing good, and when we're talking about unions, we need to make sure that our everyday working people, are protected. And then even for the city's sake, like, it is so much easier to interface with an agency who is a zealous advocate for their people, right? Because then we can have open and honest dialogue about what's best for everyone. And no, like, I'm not here to be bought as a prosecutor. I'm not bought. I'm here to do the right thing for the right reasons. And that's what I will continue to do.
Why are we still subsidizing the San Diego Zoo with our property taxes? Would you support removing that tax, as the zoo is very profitable now and no longer needs support?
Well, I think that we've seen with the most recent changes and, the parking and now a new rental agreement, that the zoo is going to be paying. And we need to look at the zoo not just as, this tourist entity, but I mean, it is a nature preservation, animal sanctuary, and important education component of our community that doesn't just serve outside interests, but kids go to camp there. Like, my daughter's gone to camp there a few years, and it's like one of those really special San Diego experiences that we should not treat like special interest. Like, this is a mutually beneficial relationship that has evolved, and now they will be paying. And they do bring people into the community to stay at hotels. They do bring people to the restaurants and kids to our museums and to our parks and our beaches. But I do think that holistically, we need to see, what is fair share for people that we are doing business with.
People are realizing green policies have increased the cost of living considerably. Now that people like Gates admit we're not facing an existential crisis and new reports prove models were wrong, will you support rolling back green spending?
I mean, I think that that's sort of broad. I think, green spending and traffic and climate change, it is still a problem, and we can't say that it isn't, but the money that we're spending towards it needs to actually be deliberate and thought through. We can't just throw up a bike lane and say, we laid this many bike lanes. Bike lanes are good. We want bike lanes because they help people get from point A to point B not in their car. But I mean, are those bike lanes safe? Are those pathways that actually need bike lanes compared to more isolated communities that could benefit from a better pathway? And then even with any type of green development, it goes back to having the conversation, because it does get conflated when it is not clear to our community what that actually means.
What are your thoughts and plans regarding the proliferation of bike lanes?
Yeah, I want to be able to ride my bike. I want to be able to say, you could go out and ride your bike and feel safe that he's going to come home, or have my kid ride her bike. But, it's about safety, transparency, and utility. When I look at the bike lane, for example, in between, Genesee and Clairemont on Balboa, like, all of those little white sticks have been hit.
Yeah.
Like, and people drive through there very fast. Like, I am concerned that counts as, like, a bike lane to help people get from point A to point B, but it's not going to get used because it's not safe. So, and then that goes back to the transparency. Like, what can we do and get buy-in? Because development is inevitable. It must be intentional. And I talk about this at Clairemont Town Council. I talk about it, like, just in life. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? And you can't always just do it the cheap way, because everything is going to cost money. But if we're going to get kids in one side of the neighborhood to school without, safely, because the only way there, the shortest way there, is through the canyon, then there should be a pedestrian and bike friendly way that's safe. And then it goes back to the utility, right? where are we actually going to benefit from? How are the businesses being impacted? What kind of corridors can we think? So one of the things I really enjoyed, and I'm, one day crossing my fingers that we can implement and work with SDG&E on is, the power line easement. It is really broad. It runs through the entire spine of Clairemont. And that would be a very direct, safe, non-vehicular, open space, but also bike pathway. And we need to think more broadly and not just, the simple, easy way out to get some gold stars somewhere.
What are your thoughts on how we as a community can address the homeless population?
I have so many thoughts on that. So when I was the chief deputy city attorney of a different unit, I created a program and it worked with police and fire to connect high utilizers of emergency services to county support, because we are not in charge. We as the city of San Diego are not in charge of behavioral health and our mental health services. And so many individuals are calling 911 every day. They're using police time, they're using fire time, they're using emergency room services, which reduces access to calls for service time, access to emergency rooms in a timely manner. And it is long-term trauma for communities and the individuals living on the street. So I would re-implement that program, work closely with the county, because when we start peeling the layers off about what type of care people need and who we are working with, we are being much more intentional about getting the service. It's not just about throwing up another shelter where if you're 50 or older, I'm sorry, you can't have a top bunk. So you can't come in here. There's no top bunks for you, ma'am. Or you're in a wheelchair. Oh, we can't help you. So the more vulnerable you are, the more, issues you have that you really need help with, the harder it is for you to get it. And that should not be the way it is, because these are known individuals who we can identify, we can give care to, and help make that happen. So that would be one of the first components, because that would save us money from police and fire and help our emergency rooms, help our communities. And then it helps us free up and truly assess, families and other individuals. But it also goes back to the conversation about housing commission and how we are investing in the city-owned properties, how we are receiving dollars. And I talked to the lieutenant governor about, public banking models. So cities and municipalities could potentially, do funding without being tied to all of these hurdles, which one, makes things more expensive, and two, doesn't necessarily meet the needs of our community. And then we can maybe create a self-funding opportunity, which would be amazing, and also looking in a long term, like we want to be able to create housing opportunities that people can, buy and grow, because we can't densify everything, although there are areas that definitely need to be improved, with infill. We need to really be serious about Montgomery Gibbs Field, for example. We are a city with 2 airports. They're enterprise funds, which means we don't make money off of them. But right in the middle of the city of San Diego, we have Montgomery Gibbs Field. It's almost 500 acres of city-owned property that doesn't improve the life of the community around it. But if we are able to re-envision how that space is used, a portion of, sales opportunities, whether they're townhomes or whatever that construct looks like, affordable housing, freshly built city services, and we can, retire older city buildings, for example, and start, reintegrating, life into stagnant properties. So, I mean, there are so many things to do from beginning to end, that it's just not one thing. Like, it's not just shelters, it's not just affordable housing. It's an all hands on deck, and like no idea is too big to consider.
Do you support keeping the 30-foot height limit along the coast, especially in the area that was affected by 2020 Measure C? I think I support. So this is like hard to say, right? Which is why I think land use and development is very localized to what makes sense here. Like, I think that Midway would benefit from breaking the 30-foot height limit.
I think the top of the mesa, Clairemont Mesa, break the 30-foot height limit. I don't have a view, but I think that as a Clairemont resident and as like a San Diego resident, when you're driving towards the water, no matter who you are, it makes you feel part of it, as opposed to blocking it off. Like, we do not want to become Miami, but I mean, we also need to think about, will a building of that height be useful in that spot? And one of the arguments that I made at City Council regarding a large building at the Blue Line trolley at Balboa Station is that's far away from any services. That's not helping people living in that building get anywhere but the trolley. So I think that there are a lot of spots where over 60-foot height limit is appropriate. I mean, over the 30-foot height limit is appropriate. But I think there are other places where we need to think about how that truly impacts the community.
Will you prioritize critical public safety, fire, brush clearing, police, and infrastructure such as water, sewers, roads, storm drain spending in the budget?
Yes.
Last question.
All right.
What is your stance on short-term vacation rentals and the vacancy tax?
We're going to go with short-term vacation rentals first. I think that short-term vacation rentals, whole home in particular, have negatively impacted our communities, not just from a dismantling of the community feel that displaces families from being able to long-term rent, which takes kids out of our schools, but it also costs us money. It costs us more with police and fire services when they're having to respond to, parties or higher utilization or different types of calls related to those. But also we're losing money when we think about our census numbers. You have over almost 6,000 homes, which had people there that no longer live there. So funding that we would get for our schools, funding that we would get, our voter voice gets minimized for the benefit of, by and large, corporate entities, and that does not help our community. So that is my short-term vacation rental whole home. I do think that, the good old-fashioned way where you can rent out like a room in your house, you can have, people stay with you for a few months. Like, that's cool. That's great. It really helps people be able to afford and even thrive in their community in the home, which is their investment. So moving towards the vacancy tax, this is going to go to the voters. And we've heard arguments both ways. I'm glad that topics like this are being brought up because we need to really scrutinize who is holding the cards in our community. Are the cards being held by, families and working people, teachers, nurses, firefighters, or is it being held by corporate entity? And I think that we need to even look one step farther to the large, for-profit portfolios of rental of REITs, real estate investment funds, and those entities that have so many thousands of units in our community that they can afford to keep them open for months at a certain price and take tax deductions on that. And then they still get the high valuation on their portfolio so they can pay out to their shareholders. And by inflating the market and holding that line, I think we need to be a little bit more focused on how we can help San Diegans in a bigger and broader way by targeting and working with the state and federal government on how we can relieve that pressure for more accountability for working class people.
All right, you made it.
We made it.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to say I thank you for, doing this. Your newsletter is really great and it's really fun because it takes a lot of work to put in there. And I think that people don't realize like how much energy it takes.
Yeah.